As far as this haggard millennial monkey is concerned, the Sylvester McCoy era has aged very well, though I can understand why not everybody feels the same. Today, I'm going to cover a story where one of the central villains is a robot sweet. Fitting, as like many Seventh Doctor adventures, the Happiness Patrol is something of an acquired taste. Greetings, distinguished followers, chosen chimp here. You're not going to see a great deal of my face in this video. We're moving lots of furniture around and decorating, and I literally have nowhere to film. So we're going to kick it old school with voiceovers and images and all that fun stuff. I hope you enjoy. Sylvester McCoy's affiliation with surreal, slightly meta silliness, and all of that's a compliment by the way, began pretty much right after his debut story, Time and the Rani. In the same series, aka Series 24, you had adventures such as Paradise Towers and Delta and the Bannermen, and I like to think that the follow-up series, aka Series 25, was a more focused and refined bash at some of these wacky ideas. Although it started with Remembrance of the Daleks, which despite being a kick-ass Dalek story is a little more traditional in terms of Doctor Who tropes, the series closed off with The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, which is anything but traditional, but is also a marvellous bit of Doctor Who as far as I'm concerned. Nestled in the middle of this same series was Silver Nemesis, yep. And this quirky gem, a story so unembarrassed by its own brazen kookiness that it's no wonder the cosmic clown doctor wears it like a glove. I mean, from the word go, it's like he's forgotten to explain to the audience or his companion half of what's going on. He just comprehends it, runs with it, and for every ridiculous line that's thrown at him, he's already pre-planned the smarty pants comeback. Before you know it, he's got his spoons and his microphone and his party poppers. He owns it. Make no mistake folks, Sylvester McCoy was and still is stellar. And talk about adventures that are tailor-made for this particular Doctor. The McCoy era is also remembered for being a lot heavier on symbolism, metaphors and the like. And there are some pretty glaring ones in the Happiness Patrol. This is Helen A, the central villain of the piece, and Helen A represented Maggie C. You can add the other letters. Such was the time and place of this 1988 adventure. In a DVD extra interview, the story's writer Graham Curry explains that this comparison was always in the back of his mind when he wrote Helen A, with Sheila Hancock giving the Thatch influence, a person she did not like, some real welly. She is brilliant in this. A show stealer in many respects. But there is more going on in Happiness Patrol. It often leans towards something that I find a little more Orwellian in concept. It's easy to attribute the suppressed protests of working conditions to the time and the place of when this serial was made. It's also worth mentioning that a gay subtext to much of the themes and imagery of the story has been identified by fans and writers alike over the years, most notably by Paul Cornell, Martin Day and Keith Topping in their 1995 book, The Discontinuity Guide. But the story itself has a much broader context. This is Terra Alpha, and on Terra Alpha you must be happy all the time, or you will be executed, drowned inside a big pipe of blood-red candy, shot with a fun gun, or mauled to death by Fifi, this strangely adorable Stigarax thing. The problem is, no right-minded human wants to grin like an idiot 24/7, especially when you're being stared at by people like this, and so Terra Alpha has its fair share of dissidence, rebellion, and the blues. Back when I covered Greatest Show in the Galaxy, I talked about how if I watched it when I was a kid, perhaps going in with the same expectations of the more universally palatable Doctor Who adventures, including McCoy stories such as Remembrance of the Daleks and Battlefield, that I would have been greatly disappointed. Only now am I able to see it for what it really is. A layered, clever, quirky story with food for thought and things to unpack. A bold experiment to which the modern Doctor Who brand owes a lot of props. Well, ditto for Happiness Patrol. I remember seeing pictures of the Candyman when I was a kid thinking, yeah, they've made Bertie Bassett into a villain. That can't be good. Though when you break it down, it's not a million miles off some of the stuff that they did in The Mind Robber and the Celestial Toymaker back in the 60s, and Happiness Patrol really is the sum of its parts, with all of these elements doing their bit to keep this story entertaining and interesting. Do I think it's perfect? Not quite. But for a mad three-parter, it's B+ in functionality. So check it out. What have you got to lose? Lovely little stream there. Beautiful. Perfect. In every respect. Hello there. I thought I'd show some of my face in this video. Just having a nice little sit down by a stream. And I hope you're enjoying yourself too. Thanks very much to Charvy for requesting this classic story for me to review. If you have a classic Doctor Who TV story that you would like me to cover, then head on over to patreon.com/chosenchimp and become a distinguished follower for just £1 a month. It's there that you can comment in the article I've written or DM me the story of your choice. Maybe just scroll through the channel and make sure it's not one that I've done already, and please no Dalek or Cybermen stories. Cyberman mythology is something that I'm chewing slowly through anyway, and the Dalek stuff I am going to do right back with the one where it all began as soon as I hit that 50 Patreon mark. So if you want to support me that way, then please do, and if you've done so already, then you are awesome, and thank you. Back to you, Studio Chimp. Thanks, you handsome devil. So we start with a film noir type street place. I can't help thinking about the Feast of Stephen in this opening shot. The sets are kind of weird, semi-atmospheric and semi-obviously in some sort of studio. It intrigues me. There's no location shooting in this story whatsoever, no outdoors to be found anywhere. According to fandom, it was all filmed at the Beeb. I do like it, but I can also understand why it doesn't evoke a great deal of happiness in people, but I guess that's the idea. Those faces. And straight out of 1984 is this guy, Silas P. His job is to track down anybody who is miserable, aka a killjoy, pretend he's one of them, get them to confess their depression, and then oof. And he's good at it, the git. Cue the Happiness Patrol, the 80s. After landing, talking about dinosaurs and complaining about the ambient music played in these troubled alleyways, the Doctor and Ace get their exploring hats on. Professor has heard some disturbing reports about this 24th century Earth colony, Terra Alpha, and they're gonna get to the bottom of it. They're barely there for 5 minutes before the TARDIS is painted pink. But of course, the Doctor actually digs it, even though I'm certain the first Doctor would not have. The Doctor gets himself arrested on purpose just so he can dig a little deeper into how things work around here. And being the sharp little button that he is, he susses pretty quickly that this is not a prison, but really it is a prison because you're sort of free, but don't cross that line or you're dead. That kind of thing. But serious, it's not even remotely possible for any right-minded person to find true happiness in this place. Its ruler, Helen A, is a forked-tongued control freak with delusions of brilliance, and her husband is a limp milquetoast drip. Happiness will prevail is her catchphrase, and it's a little too close to unity is strength for my liking. Her canned laughter jokes transmitted to the populace of Terra Alpha are marvellously, depressingly rubbish. This guy, Harold V, was her gag writer before his brother disappeared, and he's doing his level best to pretend he's happy. He reveals that when you're on Terra Alpha, you can't even wear dark clothes, listen to slow music, read poems, or even walk in the rain without an umbrella. Come on. Soon enough, us humble viewers get treated to a party, Happiness Patrol style. There's balloons, bunting, and public execution. This man is charged with an ostentatious display of public grief, and in doing so has incurred the severest punishment decreed by Helen A. Cue the creepy laboratory and the Candyman, a cybernetic being so delicious looking that the Bertie Bassett people nearly sued him for copyright infringement. I do love this laboratory though. It's the best set of the serial. Outstanding. Great stuff. And there you go, there's that. Gunge. Forgot about Gunge. This poor bloke has been drowned in strawberry fondant that's so intense in flavour humans just can't survive it. Turns out he was Harold V's brother, so Helen A just goes ahead and executes Harold too. After witnessing this, Ace and the Doctor are naturally hell-bent and heaven-sent on tearing this operation to the ground, with the Doctor initially stopping Ace from putting up her dukes in favour of something a little more methodical, driving off in a go-kart. So this is Earl Sigma, a blues-playing off-worlder stranded on Terra Alpha when his ambition to make a living through music fell through. Well, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. By the way, if you're not a native to Terra Alpha, your surname is Sigma by default. The Doctor even claims that he was called Theta Sigma in college. There's this rather surreal exchange when the Happiness Patrol drive past Earl and slap a smile sticker on him, even though with his dark clothes and slow music he probably qualified for execution. It's not the first time in this story that the Patrol's methods confuse me a little. For example, Earl meets the Doctor when the Doctor has his first run-in with Silas P, whose killjoy infiltration skills have hit new depths as he now pretends to read a newspaper titled The Grief. He then gets executed by the Happiness Patrol for looking unhappy. Huh? Although that might be because Helen A was paranoid about usurpage. Tyrants. Earl and the Doctor find the Candyman's laboratory and are rumbled by Candyman's assistant Gilbert M. He and Candyman argue like a really rubbish married couple, and I can't help but side with Gilbert on this, as pink and boring as he is. Candyman is a annoying creature to be around. On one hand, he's sort of futuristically nightmarish, and on the other, he's a bit of a temperamental wazzock. That voice. His heart is legit made of caramel, marzipan, gelling agents and the like, and he fancies himself as something of a creative artist, and often makes sweets so good that they kill people. It's really bizarre. I like the idea more than the actual character, but once you see him up close you realise that the costume is actually pretty cool. I mean, yeah, he's comprised mainly of giant licorice allsorts, but all that messy translucence on his body and the cables attached to the back of him add a sort of weird, not really nice to look at clarity to his presence. The production team did a really good job on this. On their first encounter, the Doctor tricks him into knocking Lemonade over, which sticks his feet to the floor, allowing the Doctor and Earl to escape. Even cyber neomorphs and Unit have never suffered that indignity. As a credible threat, Candyman, well, needs to get the practice in. Meanwhile, back on the surface, there's a sort of misery procession happening. Again, there's a bit of an inconsistency regarding their do and don't execute policy. They're right there, guys. Are you just gonna let them walk past? Okay. Later in the episode, you see that their sign says factory conditions are a joke, and the foreboding, doom-laden music accompanying their march and the dark, sullen expressions on their masks show how they fully embrace the reality of this society. It's miserable. Ace is all for this act of protest, being a rebel in her own right. During the same episode, she gets to know two opposing characters, which adds an interesting layer. Priscilla P is a Helen underling who feels like she deserved better, and the other undecidedly more interesting character is Susan Q, a Happiness Patrol agent who's lost the motivation to pretend that she's anything other than sick and tired of living this life. The only happiness that she's able to initially express is the concept of being captured and executed, ironically. This level of honesty strikes a chord with Ace, and they're buddies for the duration of the story. Speaking of buddies, the Doctor and Earl traverse the candy-crusted sewers and come across these strange beings. Apparently they're pipe people, and they were driven down here by human settlers, and one of them is called Wences, and they bark words loudly and have a natural inclination to side with Ace, which is cool. And they're also quite good fighters. Priscilla P nearly takes a spear to the head from one of them. You've also got Trevor Sigma, a galactic censor looking into the disappearance of Terra Alphans. He's a pencil-pushing bureaucrat, but essentially one of the good guys. He seems like a stern stick in the mud at first, but then he positively gushes once he hears Earl's blues music, describing this resultant feeling as a pleasant sort of melancholy. Yeah, I like that one too. Also thrown in to kill a minute or two is this interesting bit of commentary from these two random snipers, talking about how women get the best guns. Helen A creating division there, I guess. That tracks. But the Doctor has their number by making the gunman feel intimidated even though he has the gun. Just what the Doctor does. The Doctor joins Trevor Sigma to go head to head with Helen A for the first time, and she has no hang-ups about advocating her desire for population control and her elimination of overcrowding. She only holds back on the methodology of drowning them in fondant. Before everybody else enters the room, she is seen delighting over a folder, and it turns out that the contents of this folder are just photos of her and her pet. I mean, yeah, sometimes I watch my videos back, but no, that's taking it too far. And in case you didn't hate Helen A enough, you find out that she keeps her pet Fifi in this stupid cage thing. But all in all, Fifi is a really good animatronic, and her face displays a cat-like affection when Helen A strokes her head, which is a really nice bit of attention to detail from the puppeteers. Fifi is set on the loose and Ace blows up the little sod. No, she's alright, she just needed a bandage. Meanwhile, it turns out Gilbert M is the Victor Frankenstein to the monster that is Candyman, the puppet master to this sugary tit. Things go a bit sideways during the execution of Susan Q. The Doctor unglues the Candyman's feet using a hose that he robbed from Helen A's office, and in return Candyman diverts the flow of murderous fondant, so now it just does that one little plop. To be fair, they weren't really standing under it anyway. And this, according to Trevor Sigma, cancels the whole execution. Candyman then says he's going to kill the Doctor, so the Doctor uses a different hose to glue his feet back to the floor. Oh dear. Ace and Susan Q are now going to be executed in a different way, and the Doctor is doing that. Ace is forced to audition for the Happiness Patrol, and attendance is compulsory. Daphne S didn't make the cut. Eventually, Helen A calls for the mass, quote, disappearance, unquote, of this protest. That right there is the list of people that she's made disappear in the last 6 months alone. It's basically everybody who didn't like exactly what she likes. The Doctor gate crashes the audition by singing a somewhat melancholy piece on the microphone, and Earl Sigma really locks into it. Well, at least it starts off melancholy. When the Happiness Patrol turns up, the 7th Doctor does 7th Doctor stuff, laughing maniacally and rambling madness like the unashamed galactic jester that he is. And he's got all the protesters being happy as Larry as well, meaning the Happiness Patrol has got nothing. Now they're the killjoys. Tables turned. Whilst Helen A is spoon-feeding her stupid husband his own thoughts for him, the infighting is announced and it's Fifi loose in the sewers part 2. Look at her scuttle in there. The Doctor tells Earl to play a C on his harmonica, which triggers a sugary avalanche onto Fifi's head. Priscilla P has been demobilised and Susan Q and Earl are sparking a full-blown riot. The Empire is crumbling. Back in the lab, Candyman tosses a coin to decide how to kill the Doctor. But to Ace's delight, they turn his oven into a flamethrower and he retreats into the sewers. The pipe people invade his lab and get up to all sorts of mischief. It is implied that the tunnels are then filled with fondant, but obviously you don't see that because imagine them trying to produce that. But what you do see is Candyman's candyless corpse sliding lifelessly down the pipe. He looks like cybernetic roadkill. It's proper grisly. Gilbert explains how he was the one to make the Candyman. The bones he brought back in the briefcase and the mind was very much belonging to the Candyman himself. I feel kind of bad for him now. But of course he comes back in expanded media, how can he not? Including a big finish 2-parter where he acquires a new body that's almost humanoid. Look at him there. In learning that her factories are being taken over by rebels, Helen A packs up to do a runner. There's Terra Alpha from the outside. Looks cool. It's Gilbert and her husband. They've done a runner and left her behind. Deliberately. The Doctor explains to her one final time why sadness is often a good thing, and how Helen's tacky cosmetic attempts at forcing happiness to the majority was doomed to achieve nothing but the opposite. Happy, sad, it's two sides of one coin. It's fair to say that the Doctor takes a profound level of pity on her, especially when she openly weeps in misery at the death of her beloved Fifi. Ace says, should we do something, and the Doctor says it is done. And that, folks, is what the perfect ending to a Doctor Who story should look like. Terra Alpha gets the blues back, and so does the TARDIS. Yep. Blues are very important. If there's one thing to take away from the Happiness Patrol, it's that. I think the theme of being forced to feign this display of happiness when you are surrounded by this extremely superficial and cosmetic atmosphere that generates anything but happiness is a very interesting and credible theme that this story covered with a great deal of intrigue and imagination. I think the concept is something that is actually more akin to something you might see in a modern Doctor Who episode, but that's what the Sylvester McCoy stories were really about. They were trailblazers. They were ahead of their time. I love the snippets of dialogue from characters like Trevor Sigma when he talks about hearing the blues as it's played by Earl Sigma. And even though Trevor Sigma appears to be this kind of stern, boring human to start with, when he hears it, he gets overwhelmed and he describes the resultant emotion as a pleasant melancholy, which I just think is lovely. It's a very three-dimensional, human, complex emotion. And even Helen A, who is this horribly stern and vicious character, you see this profound, disarmed level of humanity from her right at the end when she's weeping over the death of her beloved Fifi, the only creature that she actually genuinely loved. And the Doctor's response is to acknowledge that the work is done, that the grieving process is something that is important. What a wonderful three-dimensional way to end a Doctor Who story. And I'm grateful that Happiness Patrol did that. I think its many themes and layers run the risk of overlapping each other to the point where viewers might be a bit confused as to what the takeaway was supposed to be. But I think the best thing to do is to take away that final impression it gives you, which to me is the most powerful part of the story. So, great stuff. I thoroughly enjoyed watching Happiness Patrol, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And I will leave you with this final thought. At the beginning of this video, I described myself as a haggard millennial monkey. But here's the thing. Chimps are actually apes. Have a good one.